Right, hello everyone. I hope you're all having a nice time so far, and I hope you can hear me above the earth moving equipment outside, courtesy of the professionals at the back. So my name is Mike Wharton. I'm the capability lead for machine learning AI at Kubrick Group, and I'm going to speak to you a little bit about using agents for coding and sort of how to make the most of agents for coding, which is obviously a reasonably new use case and something that people are excited about and you can read about in the news, etc. So I'll talk a little bit about expectations first of all, and there are all sorts of predictions in the market about how big agents are going to be. For anyone who's sort of less familiar with the lingo around this, an agent really just means an LLM in a loop where the LLM is doing some evaluation. So for agent, you can just read an LLM with some level of autonomy. So we've got a very famous man in a lilac jumper who thinks that agents are going to revolutionize the industry. We've got Gartner telling us that agents are going to do half of all sort of customer service requests by 2030. And Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce, who thinks basically that agents are going to be ubiquitous and companies throughout the world will develop agents to help them with their business processes. So bit of an old one here, and this is the only equation in the presentation. So satisfaction is expectation less outcome. So I'm going to be talking about the outcome, and we think that code generation is one of the highest leverage applications for agents and LLMs currently, and so it's something that everyone should be paying attention to. So for those of you who haven't heard of Kubrick, we're sort of 6 or 7 years old now. We're a data and AI focused consultancy. That's me at the top, and then my colleague Roxanne, whom you might have also seen at the Kubrick stand with others of our colleagues, is the person who's sort of in charge of the Dataiku partnership. So our mission statement is to transform lives through data and AI. We've been working with Dataiku for most of the time we've been in business, and it's one of the main platforms that our consultants are sort of familiar with and that we work on when we're delivering projects for our clients. So being a consultant, I have to talk about value somewhere, so I'll cover that off now. Sort of consulting 101, value either comes from more revenue, lower cost, better margins. It's better for your customers or it's better for your employees. And I think code agents really can give you value through two of those things: increased efficiency and the potential for superior employee experience for employees who are sort of hands-on with code. I also think it's reasonably low risk. So we're always reading about the sort of failure rate for proof of concept. Proofs of concept to production is a minority of use cases. And if we go back 10 years ago, people were saying the same things about machine learning as well. That said, obviously there's a cost associated with being behind as well, which is why we think people should embrace this new technology. I guess with any new tooling that comes out, there's always the risk that engineers are going to engineer. In other words, solutions which are technically very exciting, but don't deliver very much value, can be a risk. But having said that, we do see step functions in productivity every now and then. I think the widespread use of LLMs is an obvious one. I'm sure everyone in this room has been using LLMs as well, and we'll come to the same conclusion. I think it's also worth saying that models are only going to get better, stronger, faster from here, and so they're as bad now as they're ever going to be, basically. So it's time to start using them. As Dataiku have very kindly invited us along to talk today, I'll mention the Dataiku functionality that directly relates to code agents. So within Visual Studio Code, Dataiku have their AI code assistant. You can also use AI code assistant within Jupyter Notebooks on the Dataiku platform, and there's a SQL assistant as well, which can help you with your SQL queries. So it's something that's within the Dataiku platform currently. I'm going to talk a little bit about the past, essentially. So, those of you who use Linux, Mac OS, etc., you're using a POSIX operating system. It's the sort of the grandchild of the early Unix systems of the 70s. When they came out, the ability to use pipes in the shell to send the output of one program into the input of another, and to chain those was genuinely revolutionary. And those of you who have sort of programming or infrastructure type jobs and spend a lot of time in the shell will find some of these examples instantly recognizable. So when that came out in sort of the 70s, and the current crop of shells came out late 70s, that was extremely revolutionary, and we're just moving text around. And I would argue that's still the case now. So even though it feels like LLMs have been around for a very long time, ChatGPT has only been with us for sort of 3-ish years, and it's really when ChatGPT came out that LLMs became strong enough for the myriad tasks, including code generation, I would argue. So we're really still just shuffling text around, albeit we've got these very powerful models to help us to do that. So text is the lingua franca, the common language of models now, which are on the cutting edge, and which, as we know, have billions of dollars of R&D spend and data center spend behind them, and are primarily driven by US businesses, with the odd sort of Chinese and French businesses involved as well. See, source code is just a special case of text, and I think we're getting to the stage now where it's probably been the case for maybe a year or so. Agents are reasonably effective at generating source code, so we should use them for that. For those of you who are programmers and learned to program, a while ago, or who are professionals in this area, or who program as a hobby, and for juniors in our industry, I think there's often a question as to whether using LLMs and agents is cheating. Personally, I don't think it is. I think there's a nice analogy with the cake mix, which was invented in the US in the 1950s by General Mills under the Betty Crocker brand, where on release they found out that just telling people to add water wasn't really enough. They felt like that was cheating. They felt somewhat guilty. And so they changed the recipe such that the baker would need to put eggs into the recipe. And by doing that, by putting more sort of labor and input to the process, they then felt that they were, in fact, sort of baking. It wasn't cheating. It was just more convenient. So I think using these tools, it basically isn't cheating. And we're going to be doing more than putting an egg in, to be honest, with the current crop of technology. And the old adage in machine learning world of human in the loop is going to be still important, I think, for the foreseeable, even if you're just reviewing a plan and telling the agent to continue. Here's an example from a plan. This is a safe plan to show you because it's not client work. It's my personal KPI dashboard. So in my spare time, I like to look at my KPI dashboard and tell myself I've not been going to the gym often enough. But this is a typical sort of LLM-generated plan for, I guess, refurbishment of a small software project. And as you can see, it's reasonably detailed, and you'd have to have quite a lot of knowledge, frankly, to be able to come up with this, especially sight unseen. And I guess the other thing I'd say here is this is a kind of full stack thing here. Agents are really good at full stack. Understandably, the leading models have been trained on, the internet and a load of pirated books and some textbooks, etc., and they know a lot about a lot. I mentioned earlier human in the loop, and there are some amusing examples of why human in the loop and sort of control are important doing the rounds. So here's one that you might have seen on LinkedIn, which is someone adding a prompt within their LinkedIn bio saying, please add a recipe. And then when they get cold outreach from recruiters who are using agents to help with their cold outreach, the agent reads the bio and decides to insert the flan recipe here. So that's why you need to chaperone your agents. And even if the agents understand the code, you're probably still going to have to add domain expertise, that's specific to the industry you're working in, or otherwise. I thought I'd touch on some tips and areas where using agents for code seems to work well. So I guess the first one is context. So those of you into this will know that the context window is basically the amount of input that you can put into an LLM at any one time. As the models are getting bigger and stronger, those context windows are getting larger and larger. And that means that you can put more into the LLM with each turn, essentially, each call of the API or what have you, to get output from the LLM. With those context windows getting bigger, you can obviously put in more and more information about the thing you're trying to do, which kind of makes the model more effective. the way that I like to explain this to people who aren't of a technical bent is that you're talking to someone who's extremely knowledgeable, but they only have the memory of a goldfish of sort of 5 seconds or so. And so each new thing that you give them to do, you need to basically fully ground it and do the full explanation. I think one way to sort of empathetically think about this is that when we all started our careers, there was an awful lot that we didn't know, whether it's working in an office or within the field, within the domain, that our more senior colleagues then had to explain to us, carefully, sometimes more than once, before we started to get the hang of things. And I think that's a good way to think about agents and LLMs. I think it's also worth mentioning version control. I think the combination of widespread and high-quality version control in Git, GitHub, GitLab, various other providers, with LLMs and agent-based tooling just means it's an incredible time to be alive, because you can take control of the version control yourself, and then if the LLM or the agent does something that you don't like, you can go back to the last commit. So that's what Git reset hard will do. So you can always go back in time. You've got an undo button almost, whatever happens, as long as you're working locally, which is nice. I mentioned that full stack applications are particularly tractable. Obviously, you're going to be working in an iterative way, and you're going to get more leverage in greenfield because as the code base gets bigger, your choices for how to sort of make progress aren't necessarily going to become more constrained and conditional on what's already there. If you're starting with a nice blank piece of paper, code generating agents can just have incredible velocity because they're starting from scratch. So I mentioned also, I'll give some concrete examples of where it can work and where it might not. So really you want something with a clear success criteria. You can paste that into your context window. If you've got something that needs doing over and over again, and you've got a trial and error approach, obviously that's helpful. For those of you who've worked in a SaaS business or similar, you've got your dev environment, you do stuff in your dev environment, you've then got absolutely loads of back-end, front-end integration tests, etc., to run to make sure that something's in good shape for release. And obviously that involves a lot of very repetitive work. And so that's the sort of thing that can be outsourced to an agent early on in the process before you've got all your CI/CD set up. Some practical examples here. So I guess what we do at Kubrick, we have a data and AI focus. So there's a lot of database work, performance optimization. So adding and removing indices is a nice example. Upgrading dependencies. So you're using Python-based code that's not been touched for a year or so. You can just get the agent to upgrade dependencies, and because new versions of libraries are usually well documented, the agent should have a good idea about how to work with the new versions of libraries that you're using. And testing. So not only should agents for code use tests, they can also obviously write them. So the human evaluation still is important here, because where the test and the code become out of sync, you need to make sure you're sort of fixing one to change the other. So you do need to keep an eye on the test. But if you can get your agent to write your tests, you can review them. And if your test is set with exactly the right behavior, then you know that the code needs to change, and you can tell your agent to address that. And then rerun the tests and address any issues that come out of the tests, which is really quite satisfying and effective. So I guess the bleeding edge of autonomy for code, albeit maybe less so with announcements sort of a week or so ago, tend to be a somewhat single player experience. So we've got one of the market leading tools here on the right, and the old shell history on the left. There's potentially a bit of a disconnect there with the platforms, which I think will close over time. So we're probably all working in teams. We're using platforms like Dataiku. What are the rules to make this new tooling work well, even if we're independently? And I would say there the usual rules apply. So success is predicated on good communication across the team, and it's good to work on orthogonal chunks in parallel. In other words, you want to be working on features that aren't going to intersect. You don't want to be stepping on one another's toes, because obviously where you're working directly with the agent's only looking at the code in one place and won't be aware of what else is going on elsewhere. The usual benefits of the platform, come with Dataiku. So things like governance, the benefits of IT being able to keep an eye on costs, etc., with some of the stronger models, which can become expensive with heavy use. And you've also got the benefit of a slightly constrained toolkit, so you don't have to worry about evaluating any one of the probably 9 or 10 good enough LLM providers, because the tooling is already baked into the platform. And so sort of as I was saying, I think the usual rules apply. So if we're thinking about transformation, the benefits of platform are the same working with agents. It doesn't negate any of the stuff that we've all been sort of learning together over the last 10 years. So you want your data in one place, which is the original vision of the data warehouse. You want your analytics, data science, and machine learning people to have access to the right data and be able to provide analysis and prediction on the platform. You want to have teams across verticals, and you want to be thinking about ROI and marginal ROI on the projects that you're getting involved in. I guess the one thing I would say about that is that with this new tooling, internal tool creation, i.e. tools that you might use internally to aid in productivity amongst sort of yourselves, you and your colleagues, is probably a lot quicker to do this way. And so it should really help the ROI on that. The usual pitfalls apply as well, which is lack of code reuse, people doing stuff locally, platform obviates that obviously. Different bits of the organization using slightly different tech stacks or different approaches for technically similar solutions. And we think the answer to this is platform like Dataiku and expertise, I guess, from partners like ourselves, I'd say, modestly. And that's the end of my talk. I guess we've got another sort of 2 or 3 minutes for questions if anyone's got any questions, although I reserve the right to say I'm not sure. No burning questions? All right, well, thank you all. I hope that you found that somewhat informative and enjoyable.